It looks like Courtney has started recording, so that's great.
Perfect.
I think we will just pick up where I left off. Again, please feel free to just turn your cameras off if that's what you're most comfortable with. So today we're hosting Lloyd Summers from Red Iron Labs. Red Iron Labs is a virtual reality game, content, and platform company, and I'm sure he's going to tell you more about it. It was founded in 2016 in Calgary and specializes in virtual reality, multiplayer experiences, simulations, and hyper-realistic AAA video game level environments. Lloyd leads the development team there, and he has 30 years of experience in software, including mobile, web, enterprise, and virtual experiences. And he's here today to talk to us about this industry, his company, and how to get started in this area, plus a little bit, I think, about career opportunities in this emerging field here in Calgary. So that's great. I'll hand it over to you, Lloyd.
That's great. Thank you. So yeah, I'll get the presentation going here. And yes, we're going to cover a lot today. So there we go. And can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so yes, my name is Lloyd, here with Red Iron Labs, and today we're going to be demystifying VR development a little bit. One of the things I like to do at the very beginning is about us. It's kind of my way of saying, why should you listen to us? What is our story? Is it something that's relevant to you? I think that there are a lot of people and companies that have a lot of different experiences, and it's important to understand a little bit about the company and the people to see if those values come across to you as well, so that you can use it as a learning point. So a little bit about me. I'm the technical co-founder and CTO at Red Iron Labs. I focus on creative technology such as video games and VR. Prior to that, I worked in mobile apps, games, project management. I wrote for IoT companies. I worked at some startups. Did a lot of technical and business analysis, but I also worked in construction, healthcare, and as a chef for a while. I'm primarily self-taught. I started my career at the age of 14, started programming at 10. And during that time, I've published over 200 mobile apps, games, and products. So in my role, a lot of what I do is overseeing the technology and the technology team and making sure that everything we say we're going to deliver, we do deliver, we deliver it on time and ahead of quality so that everybody's happy. And that means working in healthcare, video games, industrial, and safety. So a little bit about Red Iron. I think that Janissa covered it very, very well. Thank you. But yeah, we're basically a virtual reality company that works on games, platforms, and content. So we do some services for companies. We do some video games, and yeah, it's been a really interesting, very fun experience. What else is key in here? There's also Rosalinda, who's our CEO. Her specialization is in culture, designing products from a critical cultural lens and examining the relationship between the human experience and technology. So where Rosa focuses a lot on strategy and growth in the future of the company, I focus on keeping the devs churning through what we have in front of us. And so it's a really good relationship that's helped build a lot of really good partners for us. So this is a little out of date. There's some companies missing, but I need 4 so that it's perfectly aligned. Otherwise, it won't look as good. But this is a bunch of different companies that we currently do work with or have worked with in the past that we're pretty excited about. So one question that comes up kind of often is, what exactly do we do here? And I thought it might be good to showcase a couple of projects quick to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, because virtual reality is a huge topic. Augmented reality is a huge topic. So Red Iron, how do we compress down what we're doing into a way that's a little bit more defined? So one of the areas we work in is industrial. I can hear our puppy is getting into things. So yeah, industrial work, which is really anything that's dealing with critical safety training, workforce training, all of those things. Some example is critical safety training with fire. So right now we're working with the Calgary Fire Department to do fire safety training, but we're also working with ExxonMobil, Louisiana Economic Development, building fire safety training. And I'll show you kind of a quick video. I can hear that dog getting into things. This is the safety training lab. To get started, you'll need to move closer to the fire extinguisher. Did you get in trouble? Long distances, hold down the big button on the remote while pointing at the ground. An indicator will appear and show you a target zone. Try teleporting to the square in front of you. So I'll turn the volume off. You probably can't hear it anyways. But this gives you an example of critical safety training. So it brings you into a workplace environment with a safety issue that's coming up that's pretty common. And you can see here, it's walking the user through how to use fire extinguishers. And it's going to, there's some little electrical things going on. It's going to start a fire. And the user's going to have to use PASS, which is a critical safety procedure, to properly put out the fire. So it's a lot of fun for people in there. One of the things that was really interesting about this project is we did it in only a couple of weeks, and had a very, very tight timeline. And then the company we built it for fell in love, and we've been doing VR simulations for them for about 3 years ever since, and that's Exxon. And the big reason they fell in love with it is because the director of health and safety tried the simulation out and accidentally burned down the warehouse. So it's a good example of doing safety training in a safe space. What's interesting to me as well is that this is one of our oldest simulations that we have. So it's definitely a little bit dated for us, but yeah. And you can see here that they're now dealing with an oil fire. And it looks like they picked up the green extinguishers or water extinguishers. So this person's picked up the wrong fire extinguisher and they're about to spread the flames pretty much everywhere. I'll skip ahead, but it kind of shows you how now they're using the right fire extinguisher, how the different environments can be done in a safe way that you normally can't do. So they get a chance to actually try using a fire extinguisher, seeing what happens when they do it wrong. It's something that you normally can't do very easily. Now they can go through and do it 100 times if they want to kind of perfect their knowledge of safety training. Now, this is a small project. We have ones, there's about maybe 5 process steps in here to put out a fire. But some of our simulations with Exxon have 300 or more steps, which are very, very complex. And those tend to fall into more workplace simulations. I'll show kind of a quick video here too. But let's jump ahead. So here you can see Terrell, who's one of our guys, is going through and following a process sheet, very typical scenario of replacing chemicals. The chemical that's inside that giant vat in front of him, if it comes into contact with air or water, it will explode or light on fire. So the question is, how do you replace that whole tank? Because all of the hoses, all of the fittings are going to be in contact with air the second you disconnect it. And so this is one that's a 300-step process to carefully and methodically replace that cylinder. And there's hoses and cables and voiceovers and tagging and all of the things that somebody goes through in the real job place. And the reason why this is so important is we built this working with our partners in the South who, the owner down there, Daryl, he was working as a nuclear technician, and one of his friends died on the job site a month into work from not having proper safety training, and then damaged the plant and injured, I think, 46 other people. And that's when he was like, I need to do something different. And we partnered with him for critical workplace safety training. And you'll never have somebody care more about workplace safety than somebody who's actually gone through stuff. So that's very cool. I only put a couple examples. We work on about 8 projects a month. Most of them last about 3 months. So we go through a lot of work. We've also been here about 6 years. So there's a lot of simulations. But I just don't want to list everything here because you'll be watching videos all day. I'll move in now into our healthcare section. Healthcare is where we're using virtual reality to basically do things that people have never done before to revolutionize healthcare. A good example is Neuro Recover. Neuro Recover, we have a giant 2-stage treadmill. We put them in parks. They're able to walk through and do all the therapy that they would normally do for learning to walk again. The only difference is now we can put games in there. So on the right-hand side, you can see the little footsteps. There's a little game that they have to stomp to music to try to get their legs working. It's just a lot more fun than it is if you're normally just standing there with the therapist telling you, step, step, step. Having music and environments and color and fun and stories really makes the person want to do the rehabilitation. The other interesting thing about Neuro Recover is we're working on the upper half, which is one of these headsets. I don't have one in reach, that goes home with the patient. So now they learn how to reach out and grab and touch things again. And we have some good marketing videos on that. I just forgot to link one here. But yeah, it's all about using game theory, virtual reality to teach people to move again. And what's interesting about this is we can use this to determine where you're trying to reach for something, where you think your hand is and where it actually is, so that we can repair that neural pathway through corrective action, which is pretty cool. We also have Caregiver. Caregiver is basically dementia care training. So in virtual reality, they get to work with an aggressive dementia care patient that's going through really deep challenges. That's really hard for them to communicate. It's hard for them to think through some complex tasks. And so what ends up happening is, as a care provider, they're learning how to take care of somebody who's going through aggressive dementia, learning how to deal with the questions that they have. In this case, one of the things that she'll do as an AI is she'll fixate on something. So she might insist that you brush her hair with a very specific brush of hers. And if you don't, she might throw it across the room or whatever. Wherever her emotion cycle takes her, she's got about 52 sets of emotions that she goes through. And so she's an AI that we have. And so it's your job to kind of understand, how do you take care of somebody going through aggressive dementia. And the reason why that's so important is they train you how to take care of somebody. They don't train you for what it's actually like until you get there. And so we built this working with Lethbridge College. It's a 3-scenario project going through, aggressive dementia care, which is really fascinating. Jumping into our products and games, I kind of mentioned before that we've worked on games both for us and for other companies, but also some of our products. I'm going to cover very quickly Muffin Fight, which I think is absolutely an adorable game, and I'm so thankful and impressed with our team for having built it. But yeah, Muffin Fight is a lot of fun. I happen to be wearing one of the t-shirts today. But it's just really cute, friendly. It's a way to make something that's competitive and fun, but non-violent, which is really important to us. Although I guess if you're throwing muffins, there's an argue there is a little bit of violence, but generally speaking, it's the kind of party game that you can have that's just fun to work with. So you get a little bit of a vacuum gun. You got to suck up all the different things to assemble your own muffins. You put them in the oven, you bake them, and then you throw them at your opponents. And I think it's about 2 minutes or 3 minutes long, where you got to compete and see how fast you can make these muffins. And the different muffins have different effects, which is really fun. So the banana, I think that one bounces, so it'll go and come back. Cherries explode. Blueberries are my favorite. When you throw a blueberry, it splits into a whole bunch of muffins. But it gives you a good idea of the kind of stuff that somebody works on when they're at a virtual reality studio. Because the people who are working on this game are the same folks working on medical and the same folks working on industrial care. So you really have to learn a complex, diverse set, and I'll get more into that a little bit further on. So other things that we build are upcoming is our Cultivate. If we were to give it a term these days, we would probably call it a multiverse game, but we've been working on it for about 2 years now. Cultivate is an open platform. It's anything but a farm game, is what we jokingly call it, not a farm game internally. And it's basically a very open world with a social bot that comes through and shares everything you're working on. It's just a really interesting way for content creators to get in and make games and make stuff that isn't traditional gaming. We also have our platform XR coming up, which is, we now have a long list of clients. I kind of mentioned this before. So back here, so this is a lot of clients that try to manage installations, updates, and patches all the time. So our platform XR, among other things, allows us to tie that to score tracking systems like LMSs. It also allows them to control and manage headsets, control and manage simulations. And so it's also a place that somebody can sell their own simulations. So if you want to get your software in front of a hospital because you don't have the contacts to get in front of a hospital, going through our platform, we'll introduce it to doctors who are actually using it at places like Foothills Hospital and give them an opportunity to see whether or not they want to pay for a simulation you built. So basically trying to take our community that we've built and expanding it to other people. So I tried to keep that as brief as I could about the products we work on, because like I said, there's so many and we work in so many industries, it's a lot to take care of. But this is a good example of just a random partial page of just some of the stuff we've worked on. There's pages and pages of it. The other thing is we do have swag such as Muffin Fight t-shirts, Red Iron hoodies, which is really cool. The reason why I put this here is because I think it's really important to understand that when you're building a VR studio or a game studio, you have to have that market and that brand, which means you've got to have a way for somebody to buy their favorite hoodie or their favorite sweater. And if you're working at a traditional company where you're building one web platform for your entire career, there isn't that same necessarily demand to get the branding into that same space. Whereas we're in a creative industry, we have to give people a way to participate, and swag and clothing and little things that you work with the community to build are really kind of important for that. So I kind of rushed through that, but I'm going to move on to the topics that I think are more relevant, especially for students, because I think everybody knows that a VR studio is capable of a lot of things. So if I show you a lot of things we've built, it just kind of reinforces what you already know. I think where the real questions come in is what processes have come out of the company and what opportunities are there for employment or jobs or things like that. So to do that, we got to talk about how we got here. Remember, we started as a game studio and then we started adding services later. And I'll talk about this a bit more as we go through, but not all game studios are good at adult learning, and I'll kind of share why as we go through. But one of the things I say all the time is we're limited by our creativity, not by the technology. If you can think about it, there's no reason we can't build it within reason. So what's different about a VR studio? We exist as a hybrid. We're kind of a hybrid between multimedia and development. So I also refer to us sometimes as modern multimedia. It means that our projects are a lot shorter. If you work somewhere like Shaw, you're going to be working on the same software for 15 years, working on securing and building digital platforms. Somewhere like Red Iron, you might only be on a project 1 month or 3 months, and then you're on to the next one, you're on to the next one, which is very close to multimedia. That means that the projects often have very tight or very strict budgets, which means you can't overbuild or have the freedom of being like, well, we'll just tell the client they need to add another 30,000 on there, because chances are the money came from a grant or something smaller, that they just don't have that flexibility. So that means that you get a little bit less time for planning and to well plan thick into your projects. You're going to spend more time on look and feel, and you got to have a faster turnaround on the projects you work on. So one of the things I always refer to is my construction experience, which is you measure twice and cut once. It means you do need to plan it. You do need to do a storyboard to design, and you do need to push it out there. But you got to eventually cut that wood. So you can't sit on it forever. You can't sit designing a project for too long, especially if it's only 3 months. You have such a tight window to turn that project around. And in truth, we get a lot of projects that are 1 week, 5 weeks, or 5 days, 4 days where it's due. So you don't get the time to think through a really complex plan. You got to move quick. So what does Red Iron do that's a little different? Why are we able to work with a bunch of different companies? And I thought about this yesterday about Rosa talks a lot about convergence and how we smash ideas together or combine things together. And it got me thinking of a good example, which is I had to do a talk for a music group, like a music thing in Calgary, and I had the flu. So I was totally sick. The flu was starting to wear off. I had about 8 hours of feeling okay. And I'm like, how do I mix music and virtual reality and demonstrate it in only 6 hours? And that's what this was. So, but before I show you the demo, I just want to specify this is what Red Iron is really about. This is why we're in so many industries, is because we love taking two very different things, we smash them together, shake it up really good, and see if something really cool comes out of it. That's why we're taking healthcare and mixing it with VR. We're taking, all of these different things and mixing them together. So this is something I threw together very, very quickly, just to show, and it won't make sense because you can't hear the music, but it shows you just how you can take music and visual and drumsticks and art and combine everything together to make something unique. So we're smashing all of these things together to just generate something new. The reason why that's important is this kind of drives home the difference between like a company that makes games and a company that makes experiences. This isn't a game. There's no scores. There's no tracking. There's no health bars. There's no enemies. There's no little characters. It uses our old logo. But what's cool about it is it's visual, it's fun, and you get to do different things. And to us, that's where things are really interesting, is anytime we're doing something that it's not being done in the traditional way for the traditional values. And so this is just a small example. Like I said, it took me only a very short time to throw this together for an event, but it shows you how you take two different things and smash them together to make something new. And I think that you have to go into virtual reality development with that mindset, because if you go in trying to build what everybody else has done, you're not going to come up with something unique. If you want to make something unique, you got to sit there for an hour, have a good cup of tea, a good cup of coffee, and think through, what am I going to do that's never been done before, and how am I going to do it different? Which brings me to my next subject, artists. So I've mentioned a few times that, the work we do is very creative. We don't exist in pure development. We don't exist in pure coding. In fact, if you're too heavy of a coder, it's going to be a little bit difficult to adjust to VR, because you don't have 6 months to make the perfect process. You have 2 weeks, 1 week, 1 day. So people who are able to iterate and build quickly do very, very well. But the question becomes, how do you get the art in there? Because not all developers are artists. So one of the things we've been doing is trying to figure out, how do we get new artists, people who've never had the opportunity to work in technology before? Because we don't necessarily want to just hire the same 3D modelers from a AAA studio and follow the same process and teach them all over again how to work in VR. The question is, if we're doing all of that, why don't we find somebody local that's part of a community or part of an environment and empower them and take it from an approach that's different? And that's really one of our challenges. So with artists, one thing we've started doing different is making an arrangement. So I'll use Mel V as an example. Her company she's building is all about empowering Black youth and Black artists. So the question becomes, how do we build a platform that a Black artist would find interesting to create material? We can't do that by just guessing or making assumptions. We got to work with that community, go to that community and sit and say, hey, would this be fun? Would this be fun? What about this? Let's build something. Until you get a bunch of youth that can sit there and create their own content inside your platform that they find interesting. And so finding those symbiosis and how we work together is one of the things that we try really hard. So Mel V, for example, is coming in and we're mentoring her in how to build virtual reality. And in exchange, she's lending us her art skills and her knowledge of the culture and everything that she does to influence the way we build things. And so it's all about doing things differently. So this is also something I want to kind of clarify, which is a question that comes up a lot is, if I'm an artist, how do I get hired by Red Iron or a company like that? And this is why it's so hard, is because we're still trying to define where we get an artist from or how we get an artist, let alone what an artist is. And so it makes it very difficult to answer the question of how an artist gets into a studio. That path is much more difficult. But what I will say is, don't be afraid to tackle technology. I said this at something similar to this at the Platform Calgary event yesterday, but either technology scares you or it enables you. And the reason it scares people is because they're afraid of failure. They're afraid of security. And so when you join a company or join a group or join a school or a board like MRU or a place like SATE or a place that teaches you to not be afraid to fail to learn, it's going to allow you to take your art skills and transform them to digital, even without you fully understanding the tools. And that's the way we approach it. So that's why it works really well with us and Mel V. She's able to build something in VR. Her first day, she had a dragon. Oh no, it was a monkey in virtual reality in front of her that was a giant golden monkey. And she was so excited to put a headset on and see this monkey she had created in about a half hour. And that's what you want, is you want them to be excited and enabled by that technology. So I'll talk for a minute about learning theories. So I've mentioned before, and I say this quite a bit, that game studios aren't always good at making interactive content, just as engineers aren't always good at making interactive content when it comes to learning. And the reason being is because they are thought to build a process a very specific way. They can get there, don't get me wrong. It's just, it's not going to be as easy as people assume. But what I do find interesting is why some game studios do adapt well to adult learning is because of game loop theory and game loops. So the top is a very standard game loop. There's the model, which is everything you understand of the world, actions, which is where you go and try something, some rules happen that you don't see, and you get some feedback like a vibration or a pop-up or something saying you did something right, and it redefines your model of the world. And that's how you learn. Adult learning is very, very similar. There's a lot of really complex models, but they all bubble down to the same four things, which is a reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, so you're thinking it through, you're doing an experiment to see what happens, you're defining a concrete experience that comes back from it, and then it's reflecting in your head to get you to do that. So those concepts are very, very similar. And that's why you see game theory applies so well in adult learning, is because the two models are almost identical. They're just in a different sequence. That said, there's some problems with that. And this is a really good example. I'm not going to read through the text verbatim. Look at the bottom photo. In there, you can see in VR, somebody's lifted up two controllers, which look something like this. And they see hands. So as a creative game studio, that's fun because you lift up your hands, you see hands instead of these controllers, right? But if you're somebody who struggles with technology, and the instructions on the screen are saying, pull the trigger to grab objects, which is what it says down below. If I can't see the controller, how am I going to know that that's where my finger is if I'm not used to controllers? And the answer is you don't. That's why on the top, it gives you a better example of like clearly identifying on your controller as you move it around where the buttons are. So the bottom is what a game studio would do. The above is what an industrial solution company would do. And the industrial solution company, in my opinion, in this case, would do it right. So you have to think through all of these iterative little things that are different. And that's why a game studio, although very creative, might build something that's not usable for an engineer 10 years away from retirement that doesn't want to learn how to use an Xbox or a game controller. You got to think those things through. So one of the things that's one of our policies at Red Iron is failing because of the controls is our fault. Failing because they misunderstood a process is why they're here. And that should be their fault because we want them to fail at the process, not at the controls. So sometimes we'll make it so that all the buttons do the same thing. We really limit the number of buttons that we allow them to use or encourage them to use so that they fail because they made a mistake in that process. And this is why I guess when you join a VR studio, you got to relearn some of the things you might have learned or might think are a good idea and understand there's sometimes a process or a reason why. So some real quick tips if you're building VR for the first time and you want to make it good is users love interaction. If they go into an environment and they try to open drawers and they can't open anything, they're going to feel, there's a word for it, but I've saw it once. I thought it was brilliant. I haven't found the word again, but I'll use the term hollow. You feel like you're not really in an experience. You're just like, oh, like you lose interest. It's also difficult for them to take the headset off. So be very cautious of their comfort levels. Be very aware that the things you show them, they have no choice but to experience for the most part. Users want control. So a game company typically does the shaking camera, looks over quickly, does all these quick things. If you do that to somebody in VR, they're going to get sick because their body's going to get sick. But more importantly, they don't want you to force the look. They want to be able to look around and look at other things. They don't always want to look exactly where you want them to look. And that's part of the control and the enjoyment. And last, keep in mind, people do like to feel included. So have the environment respond to the user, make eye contact. In traditional games, you walk up to little NPCs and they sit there doing their own thing till you talk to them. But in the real world, it doesn't work that way. If I walk up to somebody on the street and I get into their circle of space, they're going to look at me, and you expect that. So if it doesn't do that, it's going to feel like an artificial world that's not listening and doesn't care about you. And it's going to feel cold and you're going to end up walking away. If you don't follow those things, they aren't going to sit there and say you've made the worst experience in the world. They're going to walk away being like, something's off and I don't know why. So you try to make sure that you stay ahead of that. So this is our process. And I think this process is very close to most studios, which is we communicate often without trying to burden the result on the client, which means we have a discovery session, we document the findings, we communicate it with them, and then we plan, build, test, communicate, plan, build, test, communicate. What we're not doing is forcing a response. So if that client's super busy and we're sending them a build every 2 days, they're not going to have time to sit there and put on a VR headset. So you got to send them videos, screenshots. Don't ask them questions unless you need the answers. There's other studios we work with where they ask the client 100 questions every meeting that they don't understand, and it's unfair to them to make those decisions. The other thing is they also don't necessarily want to. They're paying you to be the expert. So if you're asking them questions and forcing them into a box, the question is, well, why aren't you presenting to me the reasons? So just keep that in mind. You got to communicate often, but don't burden them to define every single thing. You got to come there with a pre-expectation of what you want and lead them either to that conclusion or lead them to understand what the ramifications are of those decisions. All right, so we're getting closer. This section is a lot lighter. This is, what do I actually do? So if you join a VR studio and you're doing Lloyd's role, or quite a few of the people who tend to bubble up, what are you going to do day to day? And keep in mind, this depends on the job and the position and what you do and what you focus on. But I'll share what I actually do in a day. So 32% of my time goes to clients. That's dealing with people and trying to get them excited, telling somebody, yes, we can totally build something that might tackle dementia care. Let's try and see. And here's where we can get funding from. 20% of my time's in development because I'm a coder. I love to get into the code a little bit. 12% is art, so working in 3D modeling. 12% of my time's in grant writing and that kind of thing. Another 12% in planning. 8% is in actual meetings that are internal to the company, and about 4% spent on audio. Why that's important is an engineer working at Smart Technologies, which is a place I've worked at before, I guarantee you they only work on maybe 2 of these. The rest of them, they don't touch. Now, these numbers might change. Somebody who's a project manager might spend more time planning, less time development, less time, but at the end of the day, almost everybody at the company touches clients, works on development, works a little bit in art, will give advice in some kind of grant writing and planning. They will get involved in each of these. We develop with Unity and Unreal. In a given day, I'll work on storyboards, EDDs, reviewing those, meeting with the team twice a day, developing code, tracking tickets, meeting milestones, participating in code reviews if I get time, working with Blender. I work with Blender and Maya, and remembering if you do any art, review it in virtual reality to make sure it actually looks good in the headset. These are the kind of things you would work on. The top left is a bunch of assets and coloring things that we sell. Top right is a social VR experience we sell. Bottom left is 360 video footage of Okotoks that we went and captured. Bottom right is a video game we worked on that it stylizes everything as if it's a comic book in virtual reality. Top left is an open world builder. Top right is a Muffin Fight game where you're throwing muffins. Bottom left is a fire simulation. Bottom right is an old 2D simulation game brought in. And it's just really interesting because these are all of the things you'll work on in a month, which is really intense. So what does my schedule look like? I typically work in a given day on simulation processes, defining some roles. I'll work on some prototypes that we got to show to a client. I'll work in 3D in Blender. I'll meet with at least 1 or 2 clients a day. We'll write at least 1 grant or work on a grant every week. I try to make sure I inspire teammates. One of the things I learned at Smart is if a teammate comes up to you, Doesn't matter how important your day is, turn off your monitor, close the lid, turn around and give them attention. And one of our guys, Ian, is really good about that, of making sure that he puts his work on hold, even though he's critical to everything we do, and gives that person one-on-one time, because the difference is they will sit there stuck for a day or two while he can answer that question. He recognizes that. And even though it might cause a 20-minute delay for him, the value of empowering that person is worth far, far more. And that's something I like to champion throughout our whole company. The other thing to remember is the software you make out of VR Studio will probably fundamentally change somebody's life. You will create software that will teach people to walk again. You will create software that teaches dementia care patients how to remember things that they forgot. You will build artifacts that become the legacy of who you are at a company. And so you need to live and breathe what you're working on and work to make it as perfect as you can within reason. I'll skip over these because we're running low on time, but everything we do, you make a storyboard. So you got to know what you're making, and an EDD, which is a design document, which defines what you're making. Because if you don't know what you're making and you haven't defined what you're making, you're not going to make anything, especially in a 4-week turnaround. So you do need to create some documentation. Just be prepared to put that time in there. So we're wrapping up on the considerations. There's only 2 slides left, maybe 3 slides. So talk about considerations. This is about considerations of the industry and getting into the industry. So industry overview. One of the things I'm trying to get across to everybody is you need a diverse skill set, invest in yourself, and believe in yourself. The one thing I want to say is you don't have to be perfect at anything. You just have to try really, really hard and be willing to learn, and you can do it. So sometimes I think people get disheartened because they're like, well, a game developer will get the job, or a 3D modeler is going to get that job, or an artist will get that job. But there's problems in every industry we have to overcome all the time. Game developers have to relearn how people use controls and like to control their experiences. A 3D modeler has to learn that what worked on an ArcViz project is not going to work in VR because we don't have enough CPU usage available. Artists got to learn how to use digital tools. Engineers have to learn how to work faster and not plan as much, which is really difficult for a lot of them. So one of the things we say is we can teach technology and we can teach business. We can't teach the right mindset. So when you're going to apply for jobs, I have some small tips. First one, the game industry. And again, I'm going to come back and say this again. We can teach technology and business. We can't teach the right mindset. So if your mindset's in the right spot, it's a lot easier for me to train or hire or empower you. So challenges and consideration in the game industry, there's a lot of bad rap in the game industry that's well-deserved because the game industry has done some pretty bad stuff. So how do we break down those norms and define studios that don't follow those problematic scenarios that we see? How do we stop the grind and allow people to include their personal experiences into the things they're working on? How do we make environments that users want to create content in and enjoy and build things so that we don't have to work as hard, and empowering content creators? So getting hired, keep in mind that managing culture in a company is a full-time job. So make it easy for the company to hire you. Learn about the company, learn about whether or not you like that company. Do you want to work there? The products they're working on, are they interesting to you? Because if the answer is no, then you're forcing it to happen. You're not going to fit into that cultural setting into the company, and you're just going to fall out and be angry, and it's just not going to work. We also seek people that change the way we think. One of the things that I always try to say, and I got this from a great leader, is if I want somebody who's exactly like me, I'll save my money and work a longer day. But if I hire somebody who thinks different, comes from a different background, comes from a different cultural background, comes from, different businesses or different experiences, they're going to bring something new that I can't just pay for, or I can't just fill in myself. So that's very valuable to me. So you have to try to bring something that's more important than me just working a longer day to get the same work done. Also understand a company's vision is different than your own. There are times that we hire somebody, put them onto a project, and halfway in they go, oh, I don't feel comfortable working on, this project because I don't agree with the technology behind it, because it's not really open source or things like that. Just remember that the company's already got some projects on the go, and that you want to be part of those things. And this goes back to making sure you do your research at the front and make sure you like what they're working on. Because if you don't, getting 3 months into a project and saying, I can't work on it, well, you're not giving the owners a lot of choice on what they're going to do. Last thing, portfolios are awesome. Have a portfolio. VR industry, a little bit different. Technology, it's unfortunate. This is the reality. Virtual reality greatly benefits people with good vision, good hearing, and good mobility. We're doing a lot at Red Iron to try to take some of those away. The one we can never overcome is vision, because it's a headset. It's a monitor strapped to your face. If we take away the vision, it's now only an audio source, and you might as well use headphones. I'm not saying that's a good problem. That's a very bad problem we have as an industry, is accessibility. But we can do things like colorblind support. We can add different learning methods, making sure that touch, audio, and visual are always handled on all things. There's a lot we can do. So focus on the things you can try to make different. Getting hired, don't be too nervous. VR is new. There's very few degrees. There's almost no graduates with any kind of VR certificate. And at the same time, if they're busy getting certificates, you could spend that same time building a portfolio. The portfolio is critical for hiring. I would say that probably 80% of our decision is made on whether or not you're a fit in understanding Red Iron values, and whether or not you've shown that you have passion of trying to get into this industry. Education is a very small part. And typically we're looking at it from like, do you have good customer service experience? Those kind of things, not necessarily direct coding. Learn, understand art, understand technology, and be passionate. Those 3 things are key. And don't be afraid to apply. Don't feel bad if a company doesn't hire you too. A lot of the studios, we're one of the bigger ones, which is surprising because we're not that big. But you're looking at studios that have 5 to 20 people. So typically if they don't hire somebody, maybe they lost the grant, maybe they got kicked off of something. So just kind of like, don't take it personal if you don't get hired, and know that there's probably a reason why that happened. Thank you. Questions and answers.
That's great. I thank you, Lloyd, for all of this information. I think people will find it very valuable. We do have one question already.
Perfect.
From one of our students who's participating today. So they're wondering how they would go about building a portfolio if they're interested in VR related content. So probably some things that you would want to see, or that would get you excited to see in a portfolio for someone.
Yeah, wonderful question. My advice is there's 2 different schools of thought. Do you build one cohesive project? Do you build out a lot of samples, or do you build vertical slices, which are like a clear scope? The short answer is, if you get a portfolio that's got probably 3 samples on there, that's going to help a lot. The things that you can learn, though, you could pick up off of YouTube if you wanted to. Just follow some online tutorials from YouTube using Unity and VR. But put together something that shows you know how to use the controls, you know how to tell a story. If you can do those 2 things, it's going to really give you a good edge. There's usually a coding challenge. Red Iron, we're trying to figure out how do we do paid coding challenges, because there's a disadvantage if we don't. But so do be prepared to know enough to be able to defend a coding challenge. But yeah, I would say that if you were really working at it with YouTube or Udemy, you could get a really affordable course, or go through an official class, an actual certificate of some kind, and do a 3-month crash course. That'll help too.
Okay, great. Just as a follow-up, is there a crash course that you can recommend if people are interested and they have some time and money to invest in that?
Yeah, we do teach the VR course at SAIT. And in there, you'll build probably 3 or 4 samples. Of those 4 samples, 1 will get used by an actual department long-term. So you get to actually list SAIT as an active client at that point on your portfolios, which is nice, because there's a difference between building it and somebody using it. But it's not just there. Lethbridge College does. I know MRU's got some programs in around there. I think every school's got something in there. So yeah, I would sit down and go through them all and weigh the pros and cons and look beyond just the money. Look at the people teaching it too, and the culture. I think MRU does some really great stuff around Indigenous language and AR, which is fascinating if you want to get into the AR industry. That's where I would go to learn in that particular realm.
Okay, great. And yes, we have a really cool Blackfoot translation app, just as a little plug.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do we have any other questions at this time? Okay, it doesn't look like there's any trickling in, which is great because we're a little short for time today because we had a little while before we got started. Oh, another question.
Yeah, good question. I work a ridiculous amount because we're co-founders and owners, so we work like from the moment we wake up till we fall asleep. Our leads, the people who really lead our products, like Ian, Andrea, they probably work about 10 or 12 hours a day, which we don't want them to, but they do. In his case, the software we're building can be used for his he came out of retirement to join Red Iron specifically to help push medical, because some of it could be used for some of his family members. So you'll never have somebody work harder than that because it's actively helping rehabilitate somebody in their family. But I would say the average person works anywhere from probably 6 to 9 hours, depending on whether they're a contractor trying to get more hours or if they're, if you do 6, I'm pretty happy.
All right. We do have a hand up. Would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you. I'm Yasmin, faculty member in Department of Math and Computing. My background is in software engineering and normally teach programming courses. And definitely we have a bunch of students who are interested in programming, and this VR is coming up as a new work, and most of them are interested in. And as a faculty member, there are different opportunities for us for applying for grants, for making defining research projects with companies, and making the work that the students are doing to be paid by those grants. And I was wondering, would your lab be interested in some of those partnerships so we can make these defined research projects that students can participate in and be paid to gain that opportunity?
Yeah, we love MyTax, NSERC, IRAP, Alberta Innovates,
Awesome.
Post-secondaries. Red Iron almost entirely does its hiring from post-secondaries, from programs that we've worked in or associated with. Because like I said, we know we can teach the missing pieces, and working with somebody like MRU, we'd have a chance to suss them out over a nice 3 or 4 month period
Awesome.
and know who would be a good fit. So we would love to participate in something like that.
Awesome. That would be great. Maybe we can contact him, after this session.
Yes, please. And I'll share my email with you, but anybody else, please do feel free to add me on LinkedIn or anything like that as well for anybody.
Right. Fantastic.
Great. Thank you.
Excellent.
I love that people are making.
Thank you so much for having me today, Janista.
Yes, thank you so much for your time and your insights. I definitely appreciate them, and I think other people do too. All right, I think that's the end for today. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.